So have any of you been using a flipped classroom approach to some extent at least, or maybe fully?
Yeah, I have for sure. I mean, learning or reading your description, yeah, I have.
Okay. I think a lot more people have been using it since March in one way or at least to some extent. So let's talk a little bit about it and jump in at any time and use the chat or just open your mics. So the basic problem that many of us have, or one of the problems we know, is that research has shown that lectures tend to be less effective than active learning in promoting long-term retention of knowledge and also the ability to transfer that knowledge. That active learning is much more effective. And what we see, though, when we walk around campus, under normal times at least, is a lot of lectures that really don't look all that much different than they might have 2, 3, 4, or 500 years ago, other than whiteboards replacing chalkboards, or maybe the seats having more cushions than they were in the bigger rooms than they when they were all wood. Although now there's more plastic, I guess, and wood and Lanigan at least. But the other thing that's pretty relevant now is that when you're on Zoom all day, and I can attest to that myself, you do start to get tired after several hours of being lectured at. If you're not actively engaged in it, it can get really tedious. And so one of the goals of a flipped classroom approach is to try to get students a bit more actively involved in the learning that's taking place, or actively engaged in their own learning during class time. You've all seen Bloom's taxonomy. This is a current version. This is Vanderbilt's diagram listing it. But basically I put this up because in a typical lecture, let's say in a large lecture class, what levels of cognition generally get discussed, or is most of the focus on?
John, do you think you're sharing your screen?
It says that I am. Am I not?
You're not.
I can see the screen.
Oh, I can't see it.
I can see the screen fine.
Huh.
What are you seeing?
I'm just seeing the usual. I've got a speaker view going of our meeting.
You should have two. You should see the speakers, and you should see are you seeing everyone? Is it in a column, or is it?
I've got it in a column. I've got it on speaker view. And when I speak, I'm in the big spot, and you're all in the columns, including myself at the top. I'm sorry, I don't know what.
I'm not sure.
That's very odd. I've never had this happen.
One possibility is if you exit out and come back, that might work.
Okay.
I had it happen before once, just I like the app. Like, it happened to me in the browser once before.
Okay, I'll leave and come back.
And we're recording it, and we'll have a little discussion.
Yeah, no problem. No, I don't want to hold you up.
So, from your experience, even back when you were a student, what was most of the time spent in lecture doing?
The bottom part of the triangle.
The bottom part. And we often get into these cycles where we ask students to do reading outside of class, and when we first start teaching, we might actually expect them to have done the reading, but then we discover when we try asking them questions or we try getting them to work on things that they haven't done all the reading. And so what often happens is over time we get into a cycle where students realize that if they did do the reading, other students haven't, and you end up going over things at a very basic level because you realize that students haven't done the work. And we could end up with a cycle where, because we know that students won't, or a significant share of the students won't have done all the reading that we've assigned, we end up doing more, we spend more time on those basic concepts, and then students seeing that realize that they don't have to do the work outside of class, and as a result, they often don't. And the amount of time that students spend outside of class under normal conditions, again, has been steadily declining for about 35 to 40 years now. Time use studies have documented it It's a remarkably small amount of time compared to what faculty expect that students do outside of class. I know things have gotten more challenging for students now, but I suspect the total amount of time they spent working probably has not gone up. Although we need to get better data on that to tell. But much of the time is spent on the lower level activities. And when we ask students to do the higher level activities, it's generally in terms of homework assignments we give them, assignments we give them that we ask them to submit, or it's on an exam or test, often a higher stakes exam or test. And what happens there is those are the things that students have the most trouble with, that they can understand, they can pick up the basic concept, the basic definitions, and the basic concepts in the discipline pretty easily on their own, but we spend our time working with them often. We're focusing on those basic concepts, and then we leave the higher levels of cognition for them to do on their own. And that's where they generally have the most problems. Does that seem reasonable or reasonable characterization, at least for many classes? Okay, so the goal of a flipped classroom is to reverse it, to have students actively engage in the class time, and basically to get the basic concept using readings, using video lectures perhaps, or YouTube videos and other materials to get that basic knowledge outside of the classroom. And then when they're in the classroom, you spend that time on active learning activities, on those higher level tasks where you're there to assist them when they need it. So the basic, well, and there's just some broad activities. We'll talk about some others in more detail if we have time at the end, but team-based learning is one approach that many people use where you have persistent teams of students working through the material all through the semester. Project or problem-based learning activities could be used in the classroom where you give students projects to complete or you give them problems that they have to solve. Could be case studies or other things similar to that. And there's a wide variety of those. And if we have enough time, we'll talk about that at the end, but I'll share some resources on that too. But one of the things that's generally characteristic of flipped classrooms is that there's some extent to peer instruction where students are working with each other, where they're assisting each other. And we know that when peer instruction is used, students end up learning a lot more. One of the things that really convinced me about this was probably 12 or 13 years ago. I was at a session where there was a study that was done, I believe at the University of Maryland in biology, where they had a large lecture and then smaller sections that had been run by graduate students, but they introduced some undergraduate TAs. And what they found was that after introducing the graduate TAs, the undergraduate TAs, they tested everyone in the course, well, the students and the TAs in the course, not the instructor, at the beginning of the course. And again, they gave the same test at the end to measure the learning gains from the beginning to the end of the term. And what they found were that the students who worked with undergraduate TAs ended up having larger learning gains than those that worked with graduate TAs. And similarly, and also the largest learning gains were achieved by the undergraduate TAs. And the basic principle here is that when you have to explain something to someone else, you learn it much more deeply. And also people who are at a similar level of cognitive development, who have just mastered the material, are often able to see problems that people with more expertise don't. And they understand the difficulties that students have when they're first learning it because they've recently learned it themselves. And there's a lot of research supporting that. So when you have students explaining things to each other, you generally see some significant learning gains because the people who already had a pretty solid understanding end up deepening that learning when they explain it to other students. And the students who don't quite grasp it, when they hear it from their peers, they tend to find it much more helpful than when they hear it from a graduate student or from their instructor. So there's a lot of good reasons for that. And the evidence on that is really compelling. So most flipped classroom activities involve at least some reliance on group and peer instruction through group activities. It also provides us with the ability to engage in some just-in-time teaching, that instead of spending class time lecturing on materials that students could easily pick up on their own, and that many students might have picked up on their own, we're able to spend our time on the concepts where they're having the most trouble. So if we're wandering around the classroom or jumping from breakout room to breakout room or observing what they're doing in Google Sheets and breakout rooms online, Google Sheets or slides or other things, we can see where they're getting stuck. We can go in and chat with them and provide them with feedback right when they need it and provide them with assistance and spend our time on the areas that they need the most help with. So that's the basic philosophy of the flipped classroom approach. A couple of cases that were also really compelling to me when I first read about them. San Jose State had a circuits and electronics class where the passing rate was 51%. So 49% of their students ended up failing, well, drop failing and withdrawing. So only 51% of the students actually successfully passed the course with a D or better. So they decided to introduce a flipped course. They were actually in an experiment. The institution as a whole was working with edX, where a MOOC was developed on circuits and electronics. And what they did there is they had students complete an edX MOOC on circuits and electronics. It was a free MOOC. So students picked up the basic understanding from watching the videos, doing some of the quizzing in there, working through some of the simulation tools in there. And then class time with the same instructor and the same number of TAs was spent entirely having students working on practice problems, working on problems where the TAs and the instructors were wandering around to groups of students, assisting them with those problems. And after they did that, the passing rate was 91%. Now, it wasn't a very large sample. There was, I believe, about 90 students in the class, but it was a pretty significant gain. edX dropped their partnership with, San Jose State dropped their partnership in part because of protests from the faculty, primarily in the humanities, that they weren't very pleased with having this focus on large-scale instruction through MOOCs. But the learning gains were really dramatic. And we do have the ability to use many free MOOCs as tools for our students. And it's one way in which we could have students do some of the basic work outside of class. We'll come back to that. Eric Mazur, I use that example a lot, but he initially was primarily lecturing to students, and there were some concepts they just didn't get. And he tells a long story about it. I'll try to give a really short version of it. He said that, he was reading all this research on how much students were learning in physics, and he was amazed at the results that other faculty had, because students really didn't improve very much on their basic skills in a typical introductory physics class. And he was convinced that his students would do better. So he gave them the fourth concept inventory, and they did just as badly as everyone else did. And he was kind of shocked by it. So he started introducing polls, the clickers actually. He was one of the first people to do it back about 21 years ago now. And what he found, so what was happening is he'd explain it to students, they'd vote on it, they wouldn't quite get it. He would try it again, he'd give a different explanation, they didn't quite get it. And then he got to the point where he was really frustrated. He said, I'm telling you, I'm explaining this to you every way I possibly can. Why don't you just try explaining it to each other? And they did. And then he polled them, and the scores went up dramatically. They were able to answer the questions much more effectively, which was a basic basis for that technique that he pioneered. And what he found in studies in his classes, as well as some other studies he worked with, was learning gains between the pre and the post test. He had some classes that used clickers, others that did not, or this polling technique with active learning, and others that didn't. And in the classes where they were using the interactive polling with peer instruction and feedback, the learning gains, the difference between the pre and the post-test scores were 3 times as large in his case. Carl Wyman worked with some other faculty, and I forgot where he was at the time, but they did a similar experiment, and they found learning gains of doubling the scores. And pretty much in every study that's been done, there have been significant learning gains, particularly in the STEM fields, but in almost every case when peer instruction is used with just-in-time teaching and this sort of polling and feedback. Students become much more actively engaged when they have to solve problems and they get some feedback on whether they're correct or incorrect. I was so convinced by this way back that I introduced this in my large intro class. And up until that point, the there's a test in economics called the Test of Understanding in College Economics, which is a nationally normed test of understanding of introductory micro and macroeconomics. And the students in the class up until that point were generally scoring at about the 50th percentile, plus or minus 4 or 5% either way. And then I introduced this method. I started to flip the class, giving them more quizzes outside of the class, having them recording videos for them, and then using clickers with spending most class time having them work through problems. And the median percentile score went up to about a 70% the first time I did this. And something like 90% of the class was above a 50th percentile. So the whole distribution shifted way up. In later times, it wasn't quite as high, but generally we get results between the 60th and the 70th percentile for a median student in the class at the end of the class when we've administered that. And we do that every 3 years or so. We can't do it too often just because of the time it takes, and we don't want the test to get out there more publicly. But the learning gains were fairly substantial. So in terms of flipping the class, some ways in which we can do that is, well, two basic strategies of giving them materials outside of the class for those lower levels of cognition. You could create your own videos and learning materials. It could be some text documents. You could have interactive quizzing. You could create, low stakes quizzes that they take multiple times to practice. You can even create adaptive learning tools using a variety of platforms out there. Or you could use existing materials, leverage the work that other people have done and use those in your courses. And in general, depends on how much time you have and how comfortable you are in learning new skills. And there's some really good resources out there, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel yourself. So if you do want to create some of your own screencasts, some of your own videos, we have some tools on campus you can use. Panopto is the easiest one. I think that's become really widely used since March. It's free. You download it to your computer. You can download it to your iPad, and you can record. Well, you can also download it to Android. I don't think it will do screen recordings on an Android device, but I may be wrong because Androids now do have screen recording capabilities. But I'm not positive about Android, but I do know it works with iOS devices, and it works with any Windows or Mac, and I'm not positive there's a Linux version of it. Another tool that is probably the most commonly used tool for faculty is Screencast-o-matic. You can get a basic version for free that'll let you record videos of up to 15 minutes and post them. And you can trim off the beginning and ends of videos, but if you want to do any more editing, if you want to do overlays, if you want to have pop-up images and things come on, or if you want to be able to edit out parts or edit the audio or do automatic captioning, then you have to pay. But the cost is either $1.50 a month or $4 a month when you pay for it for a year. So it's relatively inexpensive. But you can do everything, just the basic recording you could do with the free version. But if you're going to use that, you might as well just use Panopto. It's essentially the same capabilities. Camtasia is a much more full-featured package, but I think it costs somewhere around $250 with an educational discount for the first license. And then if you want to get annual updates, it's $50 a year for each release, and they come out with a new one every year. So it's quite a bit more costly. I've been using it for about 12 years now, though. So it wasn't that expensive when I first bought it, and I've just been regularly upgrading. Adobe Premiere is a really full-featured package. It has more capabilities than either Camtasia or Screencast-o-matic, but it's also perhaps the most challenging in terms of the learning curve. It has so many features, it's perhaps a little trickier to initially learn. But if you really want to do some full-featured production, you can get that and get a copy of that from CTS. Adobe Spark is a free tool that can be used to combine images and so forth and do voiceovers, and that's another tool that many faculty have used. If you have a Chromebook, Screencast-ify is a commonly used package. It's a Chrome plugin that will work on Chromebooks, and it's free if you want to do screen recording. It doesn't provide editing capabilities, but then you could upload it to some other package and edit on that. if you have a Mac, or if you have a closing parenthesis, sorry, or if you have an iPhone or an Android, iPhone or an iPad, iMovie is actually a remarkably full-featured video and easy to use editing package where you can chop things, paste them, do overlays, do really impressive transitions, do voiceovers, and it's got some fairly decent features in it, especially for a free tool. If you also just want to do something really simply, if you just want to do a quick recording, if you're on a Mac, if you press the Shift key, the Command key, and the 5 key all at once, or on a Windows machine, the Windows key, the Alt key, and the capital R key, you can begin a screen recording, and it just records everything you're doing right then. So it'll record your audio through the default mic input, and it will record anything that's on the screen. So that's a really quick and easy way if you just want to do a really quick screen recording. And since iOS 7 on iPads and iPhones, and since Android release 11, which is I think a couple years ago now, you can do screen recording right with any iOS device or any Android device. So if there's apps or tools you want to demonstrate from a smartphone, from an Android or an iOS device, you could just basically record whatever you're seeing on the screen and make a quick video of that, and then share it back with your students.
Is that R just a right directional in the Win plus Alt plus R?
I believe it is.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. So it's just the Windows key. Let me just check. I think I can do that. I should be able to. So the Windows key, the Alt key, and then it's a capital R. So I guess it's really a Shift R. And that didn't work. It may be because I'm already recording the screen for this. Did it work for you? Oh, there it is. Yes, I'm recording the screen twice now. Can you see it in?
Yeah.
Okay, so I will stop that though, because I don't really need 2 recordings of this. But yeah, it's just a little slow, probably because I'm uploading a video from the last session to YouTube while running Zoom on here. So that's a nice, quick, and easy way if you just want to do a quick demo of something. You don't need to load anything else. You can just do it right from the operating system. And, I know this is something that they don't recommend by CTS, but it's perhaps one of the most common ways that faculty, especially in March, we're doing quick recordings, was just doing it in Zoom. Just open a Zoom session, click record, and then save the video. And that works. It may not be in some ways, it's a more powerful tool than you need to do a screen recording, but it does work. And it's something that many people have done. So those are some really basic ways of doing it. But the other thing you could do is you could even do recordings if you're doing field work, or if you're doing a lab or something. You can use your smartphone and just record directly from there and create a video with a voiceover, upload that. And in each of these cases, when you create the videos, you have the option of uploading it to Panopto and placing it directly in Blackboard through that. And when you do that, it will add captioning to it automatically. Or you could upload it to YouTube, and that will automatically caption it. So, it's pretty easy to get the automatic captions. And if you're using a pretty decent microphone, both Panopto and YouTube are doing an incredibly good job now of generating captions, unless you have some type, if you have an accent and it doesn't work as well if you have a bit of an accent yet, but they're getting better all the time. Okay. So if you are going to create any videos yourself, keep them short and focused. An hour-long video could be just as tedious, maybe even more tedious than an hour-long lecture with no interaction, as I'm trying to demonstrate here. Sorry about that. But, take concepts and break them up into small parts, and that makes it easier in terms of the cognitive load, and students can go back and review those things they need to review most often when it's shorter. And a nice thing about videos is they can adjust the speed. If someone is struggling with English, if we have someone who's an ESL student, they can slow the speed down and they could watch the captions and so forth to help make sense of things, perhaps. Or another nice reason for keeping it short is because you can then reuse it. So some of the things you do in one class might be useful in other classes where you're going over the same concepts in upper level classes for review purposes. So if you keep the video, and if you change your textbook or you change the order of concepts in the syllabus, if you have really discrete chunks of materials in your videos, you can just regroup them in future semesters so you don't have to keep doing that all the time. And Michael made the comment in chat that you don't want to mention current events. You don't want to mention, the vacation next week or quest coming up next week, or don't talk about too much. You can create videos to students that are just for giving them current information where you don't put a lot of production work into it. But if you're going to create tutorial videos, you don't want to talk about what happened in the news that day, because a semester later or 2 years later, it's going to seem much more dated. So don't mention the day of the week or the weather that's happening. Keep it focused on concepts and try to make it as evergreen as possible so you don't have to redo them as often. Until this fall, I had some videos, I'm kind of embarrassed to say this, but I had some videos I created about 23, 24 years ago that I was sharing for review purposes with my students because they were just on general economic concepts that didn't change. Others I've updated over the years. I completely redid all of them because I was recording those with a $3 microphone in my office late at night when the janitors used to come by because they were working overnight, and they'd be out there waxing the floor, running this machine to strip the floors and things often. And, the heaters were coming on and it sounded like I was broadcasting out of an echo chamber. And now I've got better microphones and things. So I redid all of them. And that's probably the last full set of videos I'm going to do for microeconomics, I suspect. The last ones lasted for 20 years. So I think I should be able to get enough years out of most of these. We'll see. Keep the workload sustainable. Don't overburden yourself. It can take a lot of work, especially if you're going to be really particular with this and do a lot of editing. I don't follow that advice myself as much as I should, but students are very forgiving of mistakes in videos. In fact, it helps to humanize you. And there's, as long as the mistakes is not some substantive issue or content, or even if you make a mistake, if you correct it immediately and that's in the video, that's fine. It helps remind students that you're human and you make mistakes too. If cats walk by, or if, your partner walks by, or if kids come in, that actually makes you seem more like a human being. And especially now, that's not a bad thing to do because, we don't have the same personal connection if we're teaching remotely as we did when we're working in a classroom.
I got those exact same comments this semester, especially if I would make a typo in my PowerPoint and because I would be staring at it, trying to figure out what word it really was. And it's exactly what you said, John. It humanized me to the students.
So yeah, and that's perfectly fine. And students actually tend to appreciate that. They like to see that their instructor isn't just this person up in the distance who just is dispensing knowledge, but that we're all working on these things and we're working in difficult times. So and I know when people have had cats walk by and things, and they've just made a little comment about it, students would often say that was something they really appreciated. Or if they hear someone sneezing or coughing, they'll ask them how they're doing and so forth. And that's not a bad thing. Yeah, and that was a comment. Don't include dates or current course. I don't know what I was trying to say. Here's one of those examples. Or current course information in general. One thing you can do, though, is, just as students might not do readings if we ask them to, if they know they don't necessarily need to do it, we do have some really good tools now that'll allow us to help encourage students to watch those, as well as keeping them a little more engaged when they're watching them. We now, as of last August, or July or August, they finally activated the quizzing ability in Panopto. So if you have a video that you've either created elsewhere and uploaded to Panopto, or that you recorded directly in Panopto, there's an editing tool. I'm going to do a session on that this afternoon, I think it is, sometime today, where it's really easy to do, though. It takes just a couple of minutes. Once a video has been rendered, you just go in, you add a question, you set what answer is correct. It could be free response, it could be multiple choice or multiple select, and then you set limitations on it. Like, will you allow students to answer it multiple times? Will you allow students to go to scroll backwards and other things? And it's really, really easy to use. Edpuzzle is another free tool that you could use to do the same sort of thing that actually has a few more features. Because we didn't have Panopto, I guess it was in August when I was looking into doing this, I actually bought a subscription to PlayPosit, which is even more powerful. It lets you put in customized feedback. It has more parameters you can set, and you can have a wide variety of responses embedded in it, free responses that you grade later. You could have essay responses, and you could even let students do discussions on the side within a video. So while they're watching it, they can post comments, they can respond to other people's concepts. And I paid for that. I think it's about $150 for the year, but I liked it so much, I'm probably going to keep doing it. But Panopto and Edpuzzle are free, and for most purposes, those would just be fine. The other thing, though, is you can use existing videos and learning resources. And also, I know with PlayPosit and possibly Edpuzzle as well, I can't swear to Edpuzzle, but with PlayPosit, you can take any video that's out there on YouTube or Vimeo or other hosting sites and embed questions in other people's videos. And you can also select the portion of the video that students watch. So you could choose a section of someone's video and embed. I haven't done that. I didn't feel comfortable basically using someone else's videos and putting questions in them for my students, but it's a tool that many people have used. And when I look through the public economics uses of this, or economics uses in economics classes of PlayPosit, nearly all of them were taking YouTube videos or Khan Academy videos or crash course videos and embedding in questions from the instructors at various places within the video, which is an interesting way of making sure that students actually pay attention to the video, because it's really easy to watch a video without paying as much attention to it if there's other things going on. But this is a good way of giving students a little more incentive to pay more attention to it and engage with it. And they also have the ability to go back and review. It's in virtually every discipline. Someone has put up YouTube videos that may be relevant to parts of your classes, maybe all of your classes. Instructors using similar readings and textbooks probably have put up YouTube review materials that would work very nicely with your class. Crash course videos by John Green and his brother and some other people they've hired are incredibly well-produced videos. I think they've got about 30 or so in economics. They've got a lot in history, and they've got a wide variety of videos. And they're very focused, they're very well produced, and students in general have found them really useful. And yes, and Michael suggested, and I do the same, to embed the videos instead of putting in a thumbnail, because then it's really obvious for students what to do. They just click on them, they can blow it up full page, or they can just do it in the window if they choose. And similarly on mobile devices, that works much better than trying to open it in other ways. Khan Academy, maybe they're not as well produced, but there's a lot of good content out there and students have found them useful. TED Ed is another tool where you can take YouTube videos and do mashups yourself with some questions. It doesn't seem quite as powerful as some of those other tools though. And another thing you could consider is, as part of SUNY, we get free access to Waymaker, the Lumen Learning Waymaker personalized learning, and the Carnegie Mellon Online Learning Initiative packages, which are free. We could just grab any of those components and embed it. Students have the text, they have embedded videos, they have interactive components they can work with. Even if you're not using it as your text, there may be some review materials you could share with students to let them get some additional support. And basically, it gives them a chance to spend as much as time as they need on any concepts they're struggling with. And just embedding some of these in your classes, even if you're not flipping your classes, embedding these in your classes as additional resources for students is really helpful, so that students who have stronger backgrounds may not need to use much of this, but students who have not as rich of a background can use these as much as they need to help develop proficiency. Merlot has a platform that's been out there for a while. It's a learning object depository, which has some videos, but it also has lots of interactive activities, some of which are probably still Flash-based. You may want to make sure they still work, because some of these date back 15 years or more. I think I've got some back to like 15 years ago. But it's a good place to look. It's indexed. They have many of the applications have been reviewed by people, and it's a nice place to search. MOOCs can be used as a supplement to your course, having students do a MOOC for free. But also, I know all of the SUNY produced MOOCs, all the MOOCs that SUNY created under one of the IITG grants, which is a large proportion of SUNY MOOCs, had to consist of items that were released under a Creative Commons platform. So as a result, any of the videos they created and any of the learning objects embedded in that can be downloaded and shared within your classes. That was one of the conditions of the IITG grant. And many of them have become a learn on your own type platform, where you could just assign students to use certain components of that. And MIT and many other places have websites that are open courseware sites, where they will sometimes have books. They'll have video lectures from some of the top professors in various places, and some of those are really good. Now, I've been talking a whole lot. Let me just say a couple more things. We did a workshop. Rebecca and I did a workshop last week, I think it was. It's all kind of blending together. Sometime between March and now, on active learning and synchronous classes. And I put a link to the slides in here on that, which has a list of various things you could do in the class. Rather than duplicating that, because there was a lot in there, if you just click on that, it'll load a whole set. Well, I'll share the link to these slides, and we've got a whole list of activities there. And I think some of you were there. So I'll share that with you, and there's a whole host of things in there. But let me go back to here now. There we go. And then also, let me get this link and put it in the chat. These are my slides from here. I don't know how useful these would be, but they contain the link to that other slide, which is probably more useful. And why is it not letting me? Oh, come on. Yeah, it let me click on it, but it wouldn't let me copy it. Oh, because I'm still in presentation mode? No, I'm not. I should be in edit mode. Well, let me click on that then, and I'll copy this. There we go. That'll work. And here's here's these slides, which may be most useful for link to the other slide at the end. So thoughts, reactions, what types of active learning things that you've done that might have worked well during this pandemic? I'll stop the screen share. I was rushing because I was afraid there was too much in this.
I've done a lot. I mean, I'm a humanities guy, so it is a little bit conceiving of it is a little different. But I've taken like basically what parts of a lot of what you said and made it into a conglomerate. I post all the videos and all the supplemental materials on like Friday morning, and then I have my Zoom discussion groups on Tuesday and Thursday. And so I break it down that way, and that's our time for discussion, whether that's, we look at an image or we look at a video together, or they bring in questions or whatever it is. I had a lot of, I think that worked well, not trying to lecture at all ever in this space.
Michael,
Yeah.
what do you teach?
I teach anthropology and Native American studies. Like I said, I'm humanities guy.
Yeah, well, I'm business law, so I have to somehow learn to shed my authoritarian.
We all
Style.
have to at some point, but
And I read that last summer, I guess, when they started doing the workshops. I started reading the descriptions of how you teach, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm an authoritarian instructor. I was horrified, absolutely horrified. So I'm working on it. I'm trying self-improvement, but it's very hard given my discipline and how I learned and how I've operated for 35 years in a courtroom.
well, the Socratic method is an active learning tool, you know?
Well, yeah, I'm better at doing, I've gotten much better at doing case studies and having the students talk a lot more. So I'm getting better at that. But I'm so tied to the information, because you don't survive as a lawyer if you don't know the rules. So I guess I'm so precise. I can't abide
But giving them problems
fake
and asking,
information.
but giving them problems and having them analyze those problems is an active learning exercise. And, you know, if you break them up into breakout rooms and let them work in small groups and report back, you know, that could be a way of doing it.
Yeah, and I do that. I mean, they have to bring to class pretty much every day work that analytical work that they have to do. And then I always spend part of the class of them giving the answers that they've come up with. And then I use that to, like you say, that just-in-time teaching. And I did use breakout rooms, and that the students at the end of the semester, I had a good conversation with them. They did like those, but I've got to use those more and more creatively. But yeah. And then of course, all this video technology stuff, I'm feeling like I'm 150 because
It really isn't that bad once you get started.
And Mary, at least what I did, because I was not feeling comfortable with Zoom. I don't think any of us were last semester. I have my numbers are either I have classes around 30 students or around 100 students. So for the 30 student ones, I split those up into groups of 15. And I didn't meet as 30. I met as 15, one on Tuesday and one on Thursday.
yeah, I have small classes. So actually, I try to keep it very quiet, but I'm very lucky. I had last semester a class of 15 and a class of 20. And
Nice.
actually it was sad, but mercifully, both classes had a few kids that just never bothered. So I virtually had a class of 12 and a class of 17. And so it was very personal. I actually love Zoom for my classes. But again, I have seniors and they were very engaged, and the numbers, yeah. Well, and my days are numbered with those numbers because the administration has caught on and they're after me. So this is my last semester with such good numbers. Yeah, well, the provost has seen my numbers. But yeah, I did put lectures on Blackboard and tried to do more of that. But again, I'm working on it.
The other thing, I mean, this won't, I don't know. For me, at least, I relied way more on images during the lectures than I ever have when I'm teaching face-to-face.
In what regard?
I would make collages of images, or I would just have one image as my lecture, and then I would talk about that image for 5 or 10 minutes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I actually started doing more of that too. First of all, in the classroom, that's the other thing. I don't use PowerPoint in my usual, but unfortunately, when I went to Zoom, I felt compelled to use PowerPoint. because I didn't have my whiteboard. I'm an old-fashioned whiteboard person.
Well, you
I love
actually
my
do.
whiteboard.
You actually do. If you click on share screen,
Yeah, I know.
it's not
I-
quite as easy to draw on
it's
there unless you got a touch screen or something. But
Yeah, I don't. And I have been fooling with it actually over this break because I have thought, okay, I'll use that whiteboard because I love my whiteboard. And I tend to like move all over the place and just it's so confining. Being in a chair is not my thing. But yeah, anyway, you don't have to hear about my problems. Nick, what do you teach?
I teach in the fall capstone class for biology majors called molecular ecology. I teach genetics lab. I teach this special topics. It's Great Lakes environmental issues. That's in the fall.
Oh,
This
you were the
spring,
one who did the book.
I did the book. Yep.
Ah, I told my husband all about that. He was a bio major at Oswego State back, in the early days. And he was an earth science teacher for 30 years. So he was fascinated. I told him about your book.
Well, that's inspired by John. That was through other.
how did the students like it, by the way? Did they like the project?
I think so. I mean, I think, yeah, I'd say 75% of them really liked it, and then the 25% didn't. But I think on average, it was a good use of time in an unusual semester.
Yes.
This spring, I'm in this Zoom meeting because last spring I was teaching ecology. This spring I'm teaching ecology, and last spring after we went remote, I decided to teach the class asynchronously for concerns associated with access to good internet and all of that. And so I did follow recommendations by John and others to try Screencast-o-matic, and I did a bunch of mini 10 to 20 minute asynchronous lectures. And so I have half of my semester pre-recorded from last semester. And so I'm thinking, well, how can I use that information in the context of ecology this semester? And flipped classroom came to mind. And yeah, and so I'm kind of, I mean, we're a week out, but I'm toying with the idea of how much to use those types of recordings as part of class.
So when you do these recordings, are you so you're sitting at a desk doing these recordings?
Yep. Yeah. And it's just me talking to my PowerPoint slides, and I try to break them up into, like I said, 10 to 20 minute sections. Yeah, what I learned, one thing I really appreciated about Screencast-o-matic was being able to modify the audio. I was only using my mic on the laptop last semester, and I would spend so much time dinking around because the background noise it would pick up on, and then it would drop my voice. So it was just, I was trying to get a constant audio stream of me talking. But finally I got a good mic from on Amazon for like $40, and that was really important for well, it was a time saver, because then I used to sit there and I'd spend probably 30 minutes giving a 20-minute lecture and then an hour editing the 20-minute lecture, because I'd cut out me going over slides a couple times, and then I'd have to listen to that stupid audio thing. But now it's a lot easier. So the mic was really important. And I too, Mary, am a board writer. The classes that I enjoyed the most in college were the ones where we sat and the professor wrote on the board, and we I liked it because I felt like I could, from my perspective now, kind of pace myself and not go over too much information and make sure I really drill home points and things of that nature. But now we're in a I've experienced that same thing, kind of transitioning over to PowerPoint based slides, which has been okay, I suppose, but yeah, it's just not really my style.
Yeah, and I'm very much a visual learner myself. So I need to, when I'm talking about something, I need to be putting arrows and circles and square. I mean, I kind of, it's just what I've done, and it's hard. Now, how is that? I guess when you're describing the, PowerPoint slides and you giving a lecture, I just do that through PowerPoint. So I guess my question is that different in some way if you're doing it through one of these other?
Well, it's the same concept. Are you recording it with a PowerPoint recording tool?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty much the same.
And actually, I've had no trouble. I listen to them and they're fine. Not riveting, but at least I don't have to edit. Maybe I'm just used to, talking on the, I don't know, whatever. So I'm glad you resolved that would drive me crazy to do that work, then listen, then I got to edit. That would really tick me off.
Yeah, I'm glad it's resolved. And I've, been, I did synchronous classes for Great Lakes last semester, and that seemed to go well too. I'm getting a feel for how many slides you can go through in a semester or in a class, and I try to break it up with various things that other sessions have talked about. But yeah, I'm just kind of considering. I'm going to try to read the room and see what the students like or would prefer. I'm forgetting the person's name, but she does a bunch of surveys with students, and she surveyed students how they would like to see instruction in the spring 2021, and it was basically a 33% even split across asynchronous only, synchronous, and then in person. It's like, you can't. How do you appease the masses that way? I don't know.
I know, that's what I've been doing, going back through my evaluations and the comments and making tweaks. And then I'm thinking, great, I'm making a tweak based on what one or two students said. Maybe the rest of the class wouldn't like this tweak.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, the feedback on these semesters is nice, but if given the option in the fall in particular, I will not be teaching online.
Yeah.
This helps me think of future snow days, actually. Like, I'm not worried about snow days in the future. You just do this.
Yeah.
I was reading a blog post by another biology professor though, and he was saying, well, maybe online learning like this is forcing us to be better professors. And at least for me personally, I think it is challenging me to really try to find more like in-class activities to focus on and kind of push off some of this lower level stuff to outside learning time, and just simply expect them to know it before you come to class. And like John said, over several hundred years, it really hasn't changed despite our despite us knowing the standard lecture isn't likely the best way of going about it. So it's just, it's a matter of finding good in class activities or good case studies to go over, and a matter of trying to figure out how to integrate that into a class discussion. And
there's probably other people who have shared some publicly on online. Doing a quick search for business law case studies might be good, because then you can adopt some of those without having to build them up from yourself.
Yeah, I joined that Harvard Business School, whatever it is, whatever, that Harvard thing. And actually, I've used a couple of their case studies. I also went out to BYU last year and did their ethics conference. And that was great because they had teachers, professors do master classes that we attended and did entirely case studies. And that was really, really helpful. So that's helped me a lot in terms of doing much more student participation. And those were really good. So I've done more of those. I'm getting there, but.
It was so much easier when I was first recording those videos 20 some years ago, and I was not expecting. This podcast thing has made me much more sensitive to audio. I can hear every breath I take and every little random noise. So I started off trying to use scripts, but I just kept going off script. And that was hard, and keeping an eye focus on it. That's why I have a green screen behind me, which is why I have this background much of the time. But because originally I was going to have my talking head there, but then I ended up doing so much editing, or wanting to do so much editing, it was just easier. I have some portions where my head is on the screen, but basically I record a voiceover, and if I mess up, I just repeat it. And then I go through and edit the audio and take out all the errors and re-record segments if I really screwed up. And a 10-minute video was taking me like 6 or 7 hours or 8 hours.
Oh my God.
So it was a long semester. But
I took a different, I mean, like, I took a different approach. I never edited my videos. I mean, I stopped a few and like started over occasionally, but like, I also would not look in the camera. I found I can't look in the camera and have that kind of ability to like improvise. And so I would look off to the side. I would look at my notes, but I very infrequently would edit at all.
that's the approach I recommend to everyone. I had trouble doing it myself, but it's so much easier when you do it, because essentially you're recording what you would have been talking to students about in the classroom, and making errors.
No
and
edit
fixing
button
it.
in the classroom.
There's no
Right,
edit
right.
button. Yeah.
Right.
And
Oh,
okay.
thank
Any
you.
other
This
thoughts?
has been very helpful.
Yes, thanks.
Well, thank you. I'll stop the recording.